Hello guys, it's me Simo Orahara, and in this video I'll try to talk about one of the battles that if it happened, it would have been the greatest battle that Bleach story has ever known. I'm talking here about the battle of the Soul King against the Gigantic Menos, because it's supposed to be the reason to start all of the battles that will come later, and also because its greatness lies in several aspects that I will mention shortly. Why do I say if it happened? Because originally the idea of that battle was mentioned in the novel Can't Fear Your Own World Part 3, when Ichibi was talking about how the Bleach worlds came to exist. And between the official translation and the unofficial translation, there is a fundamental difference in the question of whether or not that battle happened between the Soul King and the Gigantic Menos. The official translation says it was going to happen, but it didn't happen, while the unofficial translation says it's already happened, a battle between that Menos and the Soul King. That's why first of all I will talk about the events that led to this big difference, and I will show you the difference between the two translations, and in the end I will tell you about my personal opinion on what if that battle really happened. So let's go guys. To talk about how the battle was going to happen, we must talk about the time and the place of that battle. The time of that battle is back to a time when not even the worlds of the Soul Society, the real world, and We Commando existed, and this leads us to talk about the place of that battle, which is the original world. That world did not yet know the meaning of life and death, and the races that lived in it lived according to a certain Rishi cycle, and Ichibi did not specify the mechanism of that cycle, he just gave us its name. And also he did not specify what kind of races lived in that world. Were they human alone or both human and souls? Because as we know, the original world was divided to separate life from death, and that's why in one of my old videos I assumed that there were souls and humans at the same time in one world, in which souls represent death and human life, and they live together in a certain cycle. But as a matter of fact, what we know and was mentioned in the novel is that humans existed in that world, and at some point Hollows became part of the Rishi cycle. I don't know exactly whether there was a mutation in humans that made Hollows came to exist, or the nature itself brought them to life, but the existence of the Hollows in the first place did not affect this cycle of Rishi, meaning that there was no disruption in the course of the world. The problem will start when the Hollows began to eat humans, and it seems that the Hollows began to eat humans in a crazy way, and I think that millions of people were devoured in a short period of time, because the novel says that after the Hollows began to eat humans, the cycle of Rishi stopped. In order to make the entire cycle stop, the Hollows must have devoured people in a large quantities, and here where the fundamental difference between the official and the unofficial translations begins. The official translation says, if things continued as they are, meaning the Hollows continued to devour humans, all those souls would have been reduced in the form of a gigantic menace, and thus the entire world would have suddenly come to a halt. So in order to avoid this dangerous possibility, the world itself created a new life, a life of a new creature that is able to avoid the world that catastrophic path, and it was the Soul King, and he was turning them into sand of Rishi, and by this way the world returned to progress again. And as you can see, by attacking the Hollows, the Soul King stopped the formation of that gigantic menace, and therefore there wasn't a battle. However, the unofficial translation says the opposite. It says that when the Hollows began to devour humans, the gigantic menace was formed, and the world entered a state of stillness or stagnation, and the Soul King was born to stop that imbalance that was occurring, and therefore the Soul King fought the menace and destroyed it and turned it into a sense of Rishi. So this is the fundamental difference. The official translation says that the battle would have happened, and the unofficial translation says that the battle actually happened and the Soul King destroyed the Menos. But personally, from an anecdotal point of view, I tend to go for the unofficial translation because it shows how special and powerful the Soul King is, especially since he was described as having abilities of Almighty, and therefore even if that Menos formed, he would have defeated him, as well as the existence of a gigantic Menos with extra abilities give us a symbolism to that internal struggles between each one of the Shinigami versus Hollows, Quincy versus Hollows, and even Fullbring versus Hollows. because Soul King represents all those races together. He is Shinigami and Quincy, and he has the abilities of Fullbring. But whether or not that fight happened, it certainly would have happened if the Soul King did not intervene. That's why I want to imagine what that legendary fight between the Soul King and Gigantic Menos would have been like. Because just imagine with me this. Imagine with me, instead of seeing a flashback of 100 years ago or even 2000 years ago, you see a flashback occurred millions of years ago. Something really crazy. In addition to that, the one who will fight is the Soul King with miraculous powers. And against whom? Against a giant beast. He was going to stop the entire world just because if he existed. Because Ichibi described it Gigantic Menos, which means bigger than the well-known ordinary Menos. It's true that the Menos as a term is applied to both Gillian and Ajokas as well as Vassal Lord, but Ichibi obviously meant the form of the Menos that we saw in the story for the first time. Imagine with me, if that Menos appeared in a huge size, how would it have been the size of that Gigantic Menos? Because you have to keep in mind that just the formation of that Gigantic Menos would have stopped the entire original world. The original world that combines the three worlds, the Soul Society, the Wikomondo, and the real world. And there is no doubt that its size would have been measured in kilometers, and he has great strength that would have been able to destroy certain countries. So for all of this, the Soul King seems to have known that if that Menos was formed, he would destroy large parts of the world. And that's why he attacks the Hollows and destroyed them extensively to stop its formation. But if the Menos was formed, the Soul King will defeat him using his own sword. And I think that the Soul King's sword, it will definitely distinguished by its various abilities, because he is Shinigami, Quincy and Fullbring, plus the almighty abilities, so that in a mythical scene, the scene of Menos trying to advance, destroying many areas, making the world collapse, and heading towards the end, we saw the Soul King himself stand in front of him with his distinctive eyes, so that in a blink of eye, Soul King appears on the other side, bringing his sword back to his handle, while the Menos slowly fade away, scattered into sand, the sand that will later form a large part of the world of Wikomondo. That's why I said that this battle, as much as it may be in seconds or maybe hours, it would have shown us the greatness of that event, because we are talking here about an incident that occurred millions of years, and its impact remained even after the formation of the new worlds, because the Hollow was the main enemy of the rest of the other races, as well as the main factor in the disruption of the worlds. At the beginning of the final arc, we saw how the Vandelreich made the worlds lose balance by removing a large number of Hollows from existence. So in terms of chaos, the Hollow was the cause of all of these problems. In terms of malice, intrigue and domination of the worlds, the Shinigami, or let's say the ancestors of the noble families, they took this aspect. So guys, tell me what you think. If that battle really happened, how would it have been? And see you in my next video.